Hey everyone, welcome back to Free Me Podcast. Peace and love. I hope everybody's day is blessed, man, and everybody's at ease, man. I know today, being election day, everybody's wired one way or the other, man. So hopefully this little discussion that I got for you today will help ease some of that tension, man. Take your mind off some things. So today's discussion, I got Brian Crockett. Mr. Brian, he's out of the New England area, Massachusetts, and he deals with drug and alcohol addiction, behavioral sciences, things of that nature. He has a master's in theology as well, and to top it off, the man is a poet. So if you like poetry and you like the discussion, you may want to go to Amazon and give him a look. He has a book called Out of the Dark. So check him out, man. Give him some support. Give him some love. So today's discussion was very, very important. We deal a lot again with mental health and trauma as a child and how it just goes unchecked and unrealized. And again, the purpose of this message is really for my young adults, my young parents that don't know how to deal with situations, So please, just listen up to the conversation and learn from it, man. And if you have questions, get back with me, and I'll leave a link on how to email Brian if you have some questions for him as well. So before we get into discussion, I just want to give my boys a shout out. Make sure you check out their shows and what they got going on. So you got Mike with Cell Life, you have Sean with Nowhere to Go But Up, and you have Josh with DOC TV 813. So make sure to look up, each of those individuals and check out what they got going. Especially if you like the discussions that I have going on, because we all talk about the same thing just from a different angle. So check them out, man. Also, I do want to give a shout out to my listeners, because y'all are growing and y'all are supporting me, so I much love, man. I never thought that anybody would care about anything that I had to say, for real. So much love, man. I got people in the UK, I got people in Canada, Ireland, Philippines, India, Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico's in my bloodline. That's my baby girl. So much love to Puerto Rico. Thank you. Spain, Czech, and also Jamaica. Beautiful, beautiful Jamaica. I was just in Jamaica not too long ago, man. First time. Beautiful country. So, with that being said, those are all my shout outs. I want to say that I love you guys, man. Please be safe, be smart, do not be emotional. Make the educated decision. Enjoy the conversation, man. Just be safe. I love you. Wear your mask. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
Hey, good sir. How are you?
I am well. How are you doing today, Thomas?
No, I'm doing okay. I'm actually rather relaxed considering everything going on today.
Well, I give you a lot of credit. That is a blessing to have today of all days.
Yeah, here where I'm at, I'm here in Tampa, Florida, and it's gorgeous outside. I went for a little ride this morning, just checking the temperature, around. And I feel rather serene. I mean, last night I was a little anxious, but I think everything's gonna be okay, man. Either way it goes, I think everything's gonna be okay, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're in a great mind space about it.
What can we do? What else can we do?
It's one of those things. I had a friend mention to me before, a couple of weeks ago, that he's lived through I don't know how many presidents, and he said, it makes a difference, but it doesn't really so dramatically impact my life as I'm afraid it sometimes will.
Yeah. And that's the thing, that we tend to start worrying about things that we don't even know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We just create so much angst, and we can just go off the hinge. But so, I was just watching a video with you at what was the name? The name was Gordon Gordon Conwell.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that was a very, very interesting conversation.
Yeah, I was actually the second individual to speak. The individual before me was if I remember, because that was a couple years ago, was the
Yep.
chief of police of Gloucester, Massachusetts.
Yep.
I was privileged to share the sort of panel discussion with him. Gordon Conwell was where I got my master's degree. It's a seminary that tends to prepare people for ministry. They invited me to participate in a small panel conversation about the opioid epidemic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you have your master's in what?
Theology, actually.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I heard you talking about it, and something that you said was very, very good. I loved it. I loved when you said that counseling is kind of becoming, the new chaplain, the new church, because these guys are coming and they're confessing and they're opening their souls to us.
Mm-hmm. I have found a huge part of my work, and it might sound just kind of silly to say it, but a huge part of my work is, frankly, giving people time and space to be heard without necessarily being quick to offer feedback or a suggestion. It seems like a lot of people are really helped by just having someone who can sit and listen and sort of be with them as they're processing and reflecting and thinking through, whatever's on their mind.
Well, that's the truth. If there's one thing going on today, is too much talking and not enough listening, in my opinion.
That is exceptionally well said. I mean, how often we see it on social media, on the news, people talking at each other, then talking past each other, and then yelling because they feel like they're not being heard. I'm sure several wise men from ancient history said something like, if you want to be heard, then you need to hear others.
Well, the both, scientifically speaking, they both don't work at the same time. Like, your ears do not work when your mouth is moving,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's just it's just common sense. Like, sometimes you have to stop your mouth and let the thing soak in so you can understand exactly what the person is saying. Because a lot of times, I have found in life, a lot of times two people will be saying the same thing, but just differently. And neither
Mm-hmm.
one just wants to stop long enough just to understand what the other person is saying, to see that they're both saying the same thing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I've definitely seen that several times.
So what made you get into this line of work, Brian?
Well, it's funny. I kind of fell into it. I went to Gordon and I graduated in 07, I think it was, with my master's in theology. Originally, I went to seminary because I wanted to do something in academia, like philosophy of religion or something like that. And as I was working on my master's degree, I got kind of sick of going to school and I didn't want to go get a PhD. So I tried to get a job at sort of a private school teaching religion or theology or something. That didn't pan out. And 6 months later, I still needed a job after graduating. So I had seen this halfway house in Framingham, Massachusetts, looking for a case manager. And I had seen it before in my job search. It stuck in my mind because it was, I think, the kind of job I just never considered. But they were still looking for help. And the job description was basically about helping people, which I think, looking back on it, was what attracted me to teaching in the first place. So I figured, well, I'll be hopefully helping to make the world maybe a slightly better place. So I applied for the job. I got the position. The halfway house at that point was doing pretty much entirely criminal justice reentry for people coming out of prison with significant criminal justice involvement, trying to make their way back into the community. And then there was some addiction recovery going on there, but it wasn't the main thrust of the program at the time. And moving on from there to different jobs and different positions, I found myself working more with people whose primary problem was addiction or addiction related. So I've been in the field for the past 13 years doing not the same thing, but certainly in the same field.
What was your first encounter with, like, somebody that was either overdosing or just experiencing some sort of addiction. Do you remember your first encounter?
That is a good question. I am not sure. No, that's not true. I was going to say, I'm not sure I've ever witnessed anybody overdosing, but I have a few times. I think, geez, that's a really good question. I don't know if it's because I've seen too few or I've seen too many. I think my first time encountering someone with an addiction-related problem was at that position at the halfway house as a case manager. I was running an anger management group, and the person started talking about how substances affected their brain, affected their mood, affected their marriage. They're doing some really good reflection and sort of internal work in the group. And being young and fresh out of school and somewhat arrogant and thinking I knew more than I did, I didn't say anything, but I remember thinking things like, well, why didn't they just not use substances? Why didn't they just stop? Why didn't they just, easy things for someone to say and ask when they have no clue what they're talking about. Over time, with supervision and additional clinical training, I learned, one, to give the person space to talk and listen and to try to see things from their perspective. At the time, I remember thinking it just sort of confusing and perplexing, and what was the appeal in the first place if it was so destructive? And then, maybe 5-6 years ago now, I did some intensive training around trauma, especially developmental trauma, childhood trauma. And I was exposed to a lot of data that showed the correlation between significant childhood trauma and later on health issues later in life, including behavioral issues and addiction-related issues. And it was staggering. It was one of those lightning bolt moments where everything I had experienced in the field and everything I had learned just seemed to come together. Am I actually answering your question, or am I going off on a tangent here?
No, listen, you're right on point, partner, and I'm on your every word, because what you're saying, I agree with 100%, and that's, I guess that's the premise of what my show is, right? So I'm an individual that has spent more time in college than out, and I like to call it college. I don't have a scholarly education. And as I say on my show, my only knowledge is my experience. Ever since I was a child, like my life has just been one long traumatic event. There's really never been any, pauses in between. It's just been, trauma after trauma, always around me. So I had to learn at a young age to pay attention to my environment very keenly, and upon doing so, I just learned how to read people, and I just became a people watcher. And that's just, just through my life's experiences and the places that I've been, because I've just been around psychopaths and sociopaths for most of my life, just mental disorders have been constantly around me. And I just watch and I learn and I ask myself questions and just through this process, I've come to the evolution after, and me, because I'm so inquisitive, like I'll go ask these people, and they'll look at me crazy, and I may go ask this person, like, why did you just do what you just did? Like, what was you thinking when you did what you just did? Because to me, it didn't make sense. And they'll explain it to me or whatever. But so after doing this for so long, I just, and so many conversations, I just realized like all of these people, including myself, have childhood trauma, just childhood trauma. And it doesn't even really have to be severe, because I think today as a society, we think when we hear trauma, we think like severe abuse, like severe beatings, and things like that. But we're not recognizing we're not connecting the dots that, say, for instance, a child is sitting in the room with her mother, and her mother's going through the closet, and she's looking for these clothes, and she's getting frustrated because her clothes don't fit, because her husband is constantly saying that she's fat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now this little girl, after seeing that, she goes out here and she sits with her father, and her father, is sitting on the couch and he's watching TV, and he's remarking on women, how beautiful they are on the TV or whatnot. And the daughter's seeing this.
Mm-hmm.
And right away, it's causing a disconnect for me. I mean, you can always correct me if I'm wrong, but to me, it's like causing a disconnect within this child, and it's creating confusion,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then this stuff it's never reconciled, and the child has to grow up trying to understand, these multitudes of scenarios like I just described, and our kids are just growing up confused and lost. It just seems to me.
I think that is exceptionally well said. I totally agree with you. There's a sense in which we tend to think of trauma as something catastrophic, something horrific, house burned down, violent crime, that sort of thing. But we don't always see sort of the death of 1,000 cuts traumas. So take your example, right? So let's say,
absolutely, very well said. Thank you.
and I love that word disconnect too, because that girl, say, growing up, let's say she has a few experiences like that between witnessing the interaction between the mom and the dad, and body shaming and weight shaming sort of going on between the two of them. And let's say the daughter goes to school and someone makes a snide remark teasing her about her weight.
Mm-hmm.
And then because it's already sort of in her mind, that may hit a little deeper and stick a little longer than it would to someone else, or if her parents hadn't been having that kind of conflict. And then potentially, as she's seeing the strife grow between mom and dad, even if it's not necessarily overt, the snide comments, the pregnant silence at the dinner table, the irritability, the walking on eggshells, all that adds up too. And even if only biochemically, because all those experiences secrete, I think it's cortisol. I don't remember all my neuroscience, but that stuff over time can cause inflammation and a host of inflammation-related issues, irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, liver problems, stomach problems, heart problems. Never mind, a diet that may be average in America, but still not necessarily that good. And when we're stressed, we tend to veer towards feel-good behaviors anyway, because we don't feel good on the inside. So we're more likely to look for the comfort burger, the pint of ice cream, the cigarette, the drink, whatever it is that will just make us feel better for some time. And we wouldn't necessarily even articulate it like that if we're in it. To us, it's normal, especially if we grew up in it, because, it's like asking the fish, how's the water? Assuming, the fish could talk. Well, what water? This is just reality. I don't know how many times I've worked with people, and when childhood comes up, how many times they've told me, I didn't think anything of it then, because it was, literally they would say, that's just the way it was. That was our family culture.
Well, see, and here again, this is what I was explaining. I don't know if you had caught any of the previous shows, but I was explaining to a couple individuals that I'm actually speaking with. Cynthia and I were talking one day. You're familiar with Cynthia, of course, right?
Yeah, Cynthia's great people.
Yeah, so I don't know how much she's informed you about what is going on with me. Has she talked to you about me at all?
Not really, no. It was mentioned in passing, your name, and that you're doing this podcast, and that she thought it might be helpful for us to connect. But
so what ended up happening is long story short, Cynthia and I are connected through a mutual group that we're trying to form called NAFJAR, which is National Alliance of Justice and Reentry.
Mm-hmm.
And all of us have our own little foundations that we're doing in our town, and we're just trying to make one national recognized coalition, alliance for just reentry, specifically for reentry. So long story short, Cynthia and I connected on a couple of ideas, and she was describing to me about these two individuals that she was really having a hard time with. and the way that I look at it, Brian, like I am these people,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in this environment. I grew up under trauma. You know, it doesn't matter. I've never been on drugs, you know, addicted to drugs,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to that extent. I've never went through withdrawals. I've never went through the physical effects of what trauma does to you because I just had different outlets, you know.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But I understand the pain that can get you there because I've been there. I just decided to go a different route. So like I tell Cynthia, you know, I said, well, let me talk to these guys, you know, because I'm a pretty easy guy to talk to. So the first guy that I spoke with was Blake. So of course, you know, I've never talked to this guy before. He's never talked to me. We don't know anything about each other. The very first phone call, of course, was on the show. I have it here in the episode. This guy opened up to me like you would not believe. I mean, Cynthia, she sent me texts like it's unbelievable that this guy opened up to you the way that he did, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the second time I asked Blake, you know, what is it about me that he opens up to? And one, it's the relatability, it's the compassion,
Mm-hmm.
it's the relatability. It's him knowing that I'm not making any money off it. So I'm not just sitting here just listening to him because I'm getting paid to, right? So
Right.
So it's the care that he knows is there,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and second, it's because he feels, you know, that I can understand what he's saying. And there was another gentleman that, you know, pretty much echoed the same thing that he says. And I get this a lot from a lot of individuals because, again, Brian, I understand, and I don't judge anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not here to judge anybody or look at anybody and say what you're doing is wrong and you just need to change that, you know, or just stop. Like you said, that's the worst thing that you could say to these people.
Right.
You know, because you have no idea the demons that are clawing inside of these people for you just to say, well, just stop and just, you know, pick up another habit and go do something else, you know?
I think when we do that, to anybody, right, we have that kind of minimalizing, dismissive attitude that comes across loud and clear, regardless of the specific words we're using. And for someone who's struggling, they're already taxed. You know, even if it's just in a moment, they feel stressed, they feel taxed, they feel overwhelmed, they feel angry. To have someone come along and sort of Monday morning quarterback their response, it is never helpful. And not only that, if someone is in that kind of mood mind state in that moment that's contributed to by past or even current traumas, then all we do is we heap shame on the individual. And trauma is shaming in and of itself. And that connects to what you were saying. You know, the gentleman who opened up to you because there was connection and there was respect, and he knew that you weren't profiting off of this. It was one human being connecting with another human being out of empathy and compassion because the other person was there and they're human and they're valuable. And that kind of thing communicates dignity. It communicates essential worth that people, I think probably almost all people, certainly a lot of people, and especially people with trauma, they don't necessarily have that perspective on themselves, and they don't necessarily experience that about themselves. So I'm sorry I missed that episode. I'll have to go back and watch it, but it sounds like that this individual had a healing-ish experience on your show. That's phenomenal. I give you a lot of credit.
Yeah, the title of that episode is called Hi, I'm Blake.
Mm-hmm.
But absolutely, and I actually yesterday just did another episode with him. Blake has got some issues, and when you listen, I'm sure you'll know exactly what those issues are, you know, and that's the thing. I guess, you know, Brian, I guess for me, like my intuitiveness into it is like, I just want to understand how this disconnect happens. You know, where I was at, I was surrounded by a lot of pedophiles.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and at first, I had a lot of anger towards them, right? And at first, it was always just it was open market on them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these guys would come in, the guards would tip off the inmates on the inside,
Oh, yeah.
and they would just turn their back. You know, and at first, you know, I was making excuses to be violent. You know, and then I just started realizing, like, I'm just as sick as they are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I'm finding an excuse to release whatever anger I have in me, you know, and that made me take a step back and again self-analyze myself. And what makes their trauma any different than mine because they chose a different outlet than what I did,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And then I just started talking to these guys, and I just started asking them questions, and then again, that was I became, you know, more humble in that aspect, because again, trauma is trauma, you know. And let me ask you this: how many individuals do you think today walking around have trauma that they don't even know exist within them?
It's a great question. The latest data I saw on the facilitation of the Adverse Childhood Experience ACE survey, which is it's 10 yes or no questions about stuff that happened at home before the age of 18. Yes or no questions about traumatic experiences. And I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it was definitely over 50% reported at least one. Now, of the
At least one traumatic
at least
experience.
one, and at least one can have a significant impact on future behavioral, mental, psychological, and physical health. Obviously, the more that there are, the more those things will tend to be compromised later in life. Well, even in the moment too. But of the percentage who didn't report one, I sometimes wonder, was it like that fish and water scenario again? Well, they just didn't see it as traumatic because that's just how it was. That was normal. That's how things were done. I don't know. Now, I don't want to be cynical either and say no one has that kind of, we say it dismissively, like a Leave It to Beaver, 2.5 kids, dog, and white picket fence background. No one has that. I would imagine some people do. In terms of a hard percentage, I couldn't say, but I have no problem believing that over half, probably significantly, people have experienced some challenges that were very serious in their home, even if they were never talked about. That sort of, well, I was going to say kinetic energy, but that's not right. Things that we don't address, it comes out sideways, either because we're walking on eggshells, or it comes out in depression or anxiety because we're stuffing things, we're avoiding things, we're hypervigilant. So it has an effect regardless of whether it's actually known what the problem or problems are or not. But I would say well over half. Well over half.
So let me ask you this: how do you deal with that trauma as a parent? And I find out that my child, was outside playing, I thought, and then, the whole time that I thought my child was outside playing, they were involved in a some sort of neighborhood pedophilia circle going on. How do I, as a parent, deal with that with my child when all I really want to do is just not even talk about it and just make it go away?
Well, so in many ways, that's the $1 million question, right? And there's so many potential places to begin with that. I think where to start in this kind of situation you describe, I think my suggestion for the starting point would be to not blame yourself. I think when it comes to these kinds of things, we are very quick, and very kind of a broad general we, like culturally, societally, wherever, we're quick to want to lay blame, figure out who's wrong, and administer punishment. And frankly, if I were a parent and that happened to my kid in the kind of situation you described, I would be punishing myself so much already that I don't think I would need someone to say, wow, Brian, way to be a dad, or where the hell were you, or what's wrong with you, or that kind of thing. I would be telling myself that 100,000 times a day with I'm sure, all kinds of anxiety and depression and guilt and shame issues. So I think the very first step would be not to castigate myself. It doesn't mean that I don't take appropriate responsibility if there was something I should have been doing and maybe I wasn't or whatever. But once it's really hard to step into a situation if we're not in some semblance of balance or control. I wouldn't expect anyone to be perfectly calm who is walking out of a situation like that. But if I'm not even remotely self-regulated, self-controlled, I can't be of much use to anyone else. It's kind of like if you're on a plane and the masks drop and they say, help, put on your mask before you help someone else with theirs. It's going to take me time to get completely, quote unquote, right with a situation like that. But I got to make sure that at least my basics are in place, that I can talk coherently, that I'm not going to detonate on my kid and blame them, that I'm not going to look at my kid as some like horrible disease, damaged goods, whatever kind of horrible words we might use. And the more self-controlled I can be through therapy, through mindfulness, through prayer, through acceptance, through talking with people, good friends and family who are not going to judge me and can be there for me and walk through this with me, those things come first, because otherwise I'm way more likely to blow up on my kid or the perpetrator or the community in a way that is not helpful. Does that make sense?
No, that does. That makes perfect sense. So, and you're more than welcome, Brian. You're more than welcome to ask me questions if you want to know anything about me. I mean, this is an open discussion. I'm here to learn as well, and I want my listeners to learn. Also. So, but on the flip side,
well, I appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely, man. This is just an open discussion. On the flip side, real quick. Now, if that child that was involved, let's say in that pedophilia ring going on in the neighborhood, how would that child grow up if that trauma was never visited, if it was never talked about, it was just swept under the rug and not dealt with? What kind of personality would that child grow up with?
It's hard to say definitively because we all respond differently. We respond differently to the same thing. Individuals respond differently to the same experience all the time.
Yes.
But speaking in generalities, I think I would say that if and the clue being like or the significant part for the example you just relayed, Thomas, being that it was never addressed. I would imagine that there's a fair amount of shame around what happened. What does that mean? Well, the person is going to, because when we feel ashamed, we don't want to be seen. We don't want to be talked to. The voice of shame says, dear God, do not look at me. So I would imagine the person will experience a significant sense of shame around sexuality, around themselves, body image, potential issues. They're probably going to be suffering from significant levels of anxiety because it has just been catastrophically demonstrated to them that their world is not safe. And they will probably not feel safe again for some time. That will lead or contribute probably to significant bouts of depression because all that anxiety requires energy. And then eventually there will be crashes. So the person is probably going to ping back and forth between anxiety and depression. It's a child situation you're discussing, so I would imagine there's also going to be a fair amount of not only anger, but rage, which is the natural response to feeling hurt and injured. And because the individual is a child, and because of the shame issue, articulating that is going to be exceptionally challenging. And people may not believe them. And because it's shameful, they don't want to talk or think about it anyway. So you're probably going to see someone who has a hard time focusing in school, paying attention at home. When they're with their friends, it might be similar too. So they may experience some mild social ostracization because they might be in their head a lot or feeling disconnected. They may be somewhat offbeat when it comes to like social interactions and social norms. They're probably going to have a hard time studying because they're going to have a hard time focusing because they're anxious and depressed. And at the same time, things that we tend to suppress, whether out of shame or guilt or whatever, they also can become obsessions. So the person may develop their own challenges around pornography, prostitution. God forbid, they may even find themselves drifting into, not all the time, certainly, but they may find themselves drifting into behaviors that were done to them.
Mm-hmm.
I did spend a brief amount of time working with paroled sex offenders. And in my experience, although it was a brief experience and I didn't work with many individuals, I found that most of them had experienced an incident like that themselves in their childhood. But that leads me back actually to a question I wanted to ask you, Thomas, because I really appreciate what you said about encountering these individuals and it being sort of given the green light, like, oh, this is an acceptable target for violence. And you taking a step back to sort of look at that. I give you a ton of respect and credit for doing that kind of rigorous self-work, excuse me. What prompted you to do that in the first place, though? What prompted you to say, you know what, I need to take a look at this?
Oh, that's a very good question. I was tired. By this time, I'm moving into, my goodness, I'm my late 20s, early 30s now. Of course, I'm inside. I have a very lengthy sentence. And the switch for me, Brian, the ultimate switch for me was my child. I repeat this story so many times because for me it was a rebirth, and it was just one day in visitation, just to set the scene up. My mother's at that time was probably 67, 68. My mother's alone, so she had to travel by herself. I left my daughter when she was 6 months old. My daughter was probably about 3 years old at this time. My mother had to drive 5 hours to come see me with this young child and wait in a line for an hour and a half to get inside. A lot of times she would have the wrong article of clothing on and they'd make her turn around. She'd have to go change, come back. All of this is with an impatient little 3-year-old, right? So then she would come in, the visitation would be about 5 hours. She would sit through visitation and this would go on at least once a month or every couple months. And it just started to wear on me because I could see the effect that it's having on my people. And the anger that was inside of me was building so much, Brian, that it was becoming uncontainable, and I'm around people that have been down, gone 15, 20 years out of society. And I see what this has done to these people. It just, institutionalized isn't the word, it's just, I don't even know how to explain it. It's just, they've succumbed to this environment of just complete ignorance, and I'm seeing this around me and I'm like, this isn't what I wanted my life to be. This isn't me. This isn't me. I don't belong here. And I still wasn't figuring it out. And I'm still building anger. So this one day, my daughter, she's going to leave, and the problems at home, between her mother and I, because this is 3 years going in now. So everything's starting to fall. My world is starting to fall apart. My glass world that I thought that I had, and I snapped, and my she's clawing at my clothes, and I grabbed her arms and I pulled her off me, and I just tell my mom, just go, and I go back to my room. I throw the towel up over the door. I go in, and Brian, I swear to you, partner, I beat the shit out of myself. I'm hitting myself. I'm hitting the walls. I'm hurt. I'm trying to do everything that I can to hurt myself because I was so mad, and at that moment, I was doing that because I realized that all of this is my friggin' fault. This is all my fault. It's all my fault. Look what I'm doing to my people. Look what I've done to them. You know, it's just, and in that moment of clarity, I released everything that I had inside of me, you know, and I was exhausted physically, mentally, spiritually. I was just drained. Everything was out of me, you know. And like I explained to Blake, because Blake asked me the same question you asked me in a similar fashion. You know, he's like, well, how did you do it? And like I explained to him, you know, in that moment, I said, you know, what is it that I don't like about myself? What is it that I'm so angry about myself or so scared of myself, you know? And I just started rattling things off. You know, I'm ugly, my ears messed up, you know, I'm stupid, I can't ever do things right, I lie, I cheat, I manipulate, just everything that I didn't like about myself that I always knew was in me, but I never admitted, you know? So, okay, now I say, all right, that's the truth. That's what I really don't like about me. Okay, what do I like? And I had to think for one thing. You know, of course, I started rattling off a bunch of things, but I'm questioning those things. You know, of course, the first thing I say is, okay, well, I'm a good person. Okay, well, if I'm a good person, why am I in prison? Why are so many people around me hurt? You know, so I'm not a good person. But I do want to be a good person. So that's better for me to say. So I just went through this process until I found like a common ground, you know, and that common ground was I care. I knew without a doubt that I cared about human beings. I cared about people. I cared. And that's where I started from, man. And I just built from there. You know, I stopped reading fiction. I stopped watching movies. I started picking up biographies. I started picking up, you know, just any nonfiction that I could pick up until I got into the metaphysical realm, you know, and I started picking up literature into that realm. And then that was a whole, I mean, that was a cataclysmic shift for me. You know, that just shifted everything when I got into the metaphysical. And The Secret is what set that off. The Secret, when I watched that the first time. But that was it. It was that self-analysis that just triggered within me. And from that moment, when I was doing things, I would ask myself, why am I doing this? You know, why am I doing this? Why am I hurting this man? This man didn't do anything to me or my child. He didn't do anything to me personally. You know, why am I inflicting on this? Because I hate what his ideal is. I hate what his escape has become, I guess you could say. But that doesn't make it any different from what my escape was. My escape was just as violent. I was hurting people, you know? And it was just that thought process of within that did it. And it all started with my daughter, because at the end of the day, I want my daughter to say, you know what? I'm proud of my dad. You know, my dad came home, he made mistakes, but he is a good guy. And he is doing things to repair what he's done, you know?
That's a beautiful answer. And not only do I give you credit for your honesty, but I give you credit for doing that kind of self-work. I forget who said it, but someone said that the surest way to go to hell is to try to avoid going to hell. And when it comes to doing that kind of self-work, I find personally and professionally, many people are often resistant. Heck, I'm resistant sometimes, because I think sometimes we have this suspicion. It's like we kind of look at it like poking around a sewer. It's dark, smells funny, it's kind of creepy, and you don't really know what's in there. So why would I do this? In some ways, it's easier, it's simpler to see things outside and react to what's outside of us, rather than taking some time to look inside, and then we can respond to what's inside, and then we can respond to what's outside, rather than reacting to it.
But why is that, Brian? Why is it easier for me to look at you and point out what you're doing wrong, knowing that I'm doing the same exact thing? Why is it easier for me to point out your fault knowing I have the same fault?
I mean, that's a profound question. And I mean, that's the kind of question metaphysicists and religions have been, trying to have been asking and trying to answer for, well, probably since there were those concepts. I don't know, for me, I mean, for what it's worth and for what it comes down to, it's easier, it's simpler to do that than it is to take responsibility and to look inside. It's more effort to look inside. It's more effort to control myself. It's more effort to ask myself, why am I thinking this? Why am I feeling that? And I don't think we always necessarily like the potential moral implications of some of that behavior has for us. You put it beautifully and succinctly when you were sharing just now about being in that cell and that, what do I like about myself? Which one I give you credit for asking and doing the balanced approach. And you said, well, I'm a good person. But then you questioned that with your behavior. Well, I guess I'm not a good person. I think many people would be very, very uncomfortable to come face to face with the potential fact that they may not be as good a person morally as they think they are.
And that's okay.
Yes.
And that's like I tell Blake and I tell it, and it's okay. It's okay to say, you know what, I'm fucked up, but because then that's what creates change.
Yes.
Then you have to say after that, but I don't want to be this way. So let me do what I have to do in order to make that happen.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you say, Brian, and I see this in today's society everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is so pernicious to our culture because what's happening is it's making us so sensitive, because I would rather create laws to stop you from hurting my feelings than for me just to ask myself, why are you hurting my feelings? You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it's okay. You call me an asshole. Okay. Am I an asshole? I'm not an asshole. So therefore it doesn't bother me.
Right.
But if it does bother me, then I have to question, well, why does it bother me? There's something there that's saying, well, you know what? I know I have those type of ways,
mm-hmm.
And so it's just self-reflection, but you're absolutely correct, man. I think it's because of the laziness and nobody has time anymore. We have constant distractions around us from the moment we get up to the moment we go to sleep. We have no time for self-focus or self-reflection because we're just constantly distracted.
I totally agree with that. And we don't live in a culture or society that values that at all. We are the America runs on Dunkin's. Give me my coffee. Let me get to work. Let me answer my phone. Let me send this text. Let me send this email. Let me go to this meeting. Let me pick up my kids. Let me go home. Let me make dinner. Let me drop off my kids. Let me do this and let me crash into bed. That's the kind of culture we are now. And I forget, I think it was Benjamin Hoff. He wrote The Tao of Winnie the Pooh, who I think he put it beautifully. He said, time-saving devices, or no, what did he say? He said, time cannot be saved. It can only be spent. And when we look at a lot of our time-saving devices, and I think more especially our relationship to them, because I don't think the technology is like bad or like evil in and of itself. But when we have the kind of relationship that we tend to have with our technology, our social media, etc., then we find ourselves putting a lot of time and effort and energy into those things rather than taking time to just sit. So like a couple of weeks ago, it was raining and I took some time. I hadn't done this in years and I had missed doing it. I took some time to just sit on my sofa and watch the rain hit the back door and listen to it. And it was just this very peaceful, grounding, calming moment. I wasn't especially stressed, but I had done that thing more often when I was younger and I missed it. Now, take everything you're talking about and apply it to prison. And you take people who have probably significant trauma in their background and you put them in that kind of environment where I mean, you're probably much more familiar with it than I am, just based on what you've been so forthrightly sharing with me. I've learned a fair amount just from what people have told me, but in an environment that, well, how would you describe the prison environment? Let me start there.
So for me, because I guess, I started at a very young age, man.
Mm-hmm.
I started at 12 years old, and at 12 years old, I was already being housed in state facilities, in and out, and it just didn't stop, until I ended up, running a 17-year sentence. So I was never intimidated by it. I was never fearful of it, but I always knew I was in a dangerous situation. But I always knew that, just, I guess, instinctually, that as long as I was honest with myself and I was just a real person and I showed respect, I would never have no issues.
Mm-hmm.
I never had problems inside. I never had problems with the guards. I never had problems with inmates. I got along with everybody. The only problems I had are ones that I created, and that just comes with learning the territory and being, as they call, heart checked. You're always going to have your heart checked, because you're in a very manipulative world. Right. So right away, as soon as you get on the compound, everybody wants to know who they can manipulate and who they can't. But Brian, I can tell you that inside prison, there is no difference between inside prison and outside. There's no difference. The only difference is it's just more compressed, right? It's just a microcosm. It's just a smaller area. And you're dealing with individuals that have proven to make emotional decisions. I don't like to say, I really don't like to say individuals that have proven to be criminals, because there's criminals everywhere. Right. They just haven't been caught.
Yes, well said.
You know what I mean? So just because you have a select few of individuals that are behind the fence doesn't mean that they're any different from the individuals that's outside of the fence. And that goes to show with what goes on with the guards. Many of the guards are criminals. Many of the guards are psychopaths. And like I say, the whole prison environment is a playground for psychopaths, and so you just know you're in this type of environment. It's hard to explain, because to me, Brian, it was just life.
Right.
It was the same thing I was dealing with outside. And I guess that type of mentality helped me deal with that sentence, and it made me start looking at prison in a completely different light, because I started understanding that there's people out here in society that are in a deeper prison than I am, so it just became a mental state for me. So it's all just on how you look at it. It's all on how the individual how their life experience was going into that type of environment. So
taking that as an answer, and I respect that answer, Thomas, and take an individual who had some significant trauma in their background and placing them in an environment that is, I think, as you said, highly manipulative and also potentially very dangerous. I would imagine, and obviously I'm speaking in very broad generalities, and I very much welcome your thoughts and comments on this. I would imagine one of two things would tend to happen, and maybe I'm being overly simplistic. Either it appeals to, appeals isn't a good word. Because someone who has a trauma history is in some sense used to being or perceiving danger. And if you put them in an environment where it is rather dangerous or potentially dangerous, they may acclimate very well by falling back on their sort of familiarities with their trauma experiences, or maybe it might aggravate their trauma by feeding into something that's already very hard for them. So I guess in one sense, I'm wondering, like, does a person adapt very well, but does that adaptation then not serve them when it's time for them to leave? Or does the individual not handle it well at all because they're already dealing with a fair amount of trauma and this is just like a step too far? I mean, what do you think of that? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's a very good question, and I understood it fully. And I would say again, it has to come back to how that specific individual deals with whatever trauma it is. You know, just in my experience, from what I understand and from what I've learned, is when you come into prison, you're going to repeat the same behaviors that you were doing on the street until you recognize where those behaviors are coming from. So it's not about the length of sentence. It's about getting to the individual's mind and showing them the decisions that they're making is based upon some trauma that has happened in their life. Now, how they respond to that, you know, it's to me, it's instinctual. You know, it goes to the animal within that person. You know, it's like I explained to my daughter, you know, the only thing that separates us as human beings from animals is just thought. We have the ability to think. And if you take away thought, all you have is instinct. Instinct is what's built upon the environment that you're in. You know, when you're in this environment for so long, you adapt instincts for that environment to learn how to survive, you know. So when you take away that thought and you're working off instinct, you know, which happens when you know, and of course you can always correct me if I'm wrong. You know, but to me, when trauma is occurring, thought shuts down. Right, you're not thinking in those moments. Adrenaline is pumping. You're just working off instinct. So it's in those moments. How do you react? You know, when you go to the animal kingdom, which I've you know, unfortunately, you know, watched dogs fight, chickens fight, whatnot. When it comes to you know, a fight to the death potentially, because both creatures feel like they're in a fight to the death. When they're in that sort of environment and that sort of trauma is going on, two things are going to occur. They're either going to fight back with an animalistic rage, or they're just going to lay down and die. And that's exactly what they'll do. They'll just lay down and take whatever comes to them. So I've seen it on both ends. You know, again, like I say, that's what the heart check is. You know, it didn't happen to me until I went to a place called Beaumont. Now, when I get to Beaumont, Beaumont is, it's titled Bloody Beaumont. Brian, how long do I have you for?
So for another like 5-10 minutes, I think I could squeeze in.
Okay, so I'll make this real brief so you can finish up. So I get to Beaumont, and my heart check was the nickname for this place is called Bloody Beaumont, right? And it is. It's a war zone, you know, and it's deep in the heart of Texas. And so when I get there, I have several dudes that are made. They were made to intimidate. That's what their role is. And these dudes were handpicked to greet people when they come in the door. So when I have these dudes come up to me, very, very intimidating, very scary, tattoos, skulls all over their faces or whatnot, very big guys, you know, and they ask me, what are you in here for? What are you doing here? So I have to give them a rundown of what I'm going through, and they can see right through you. You know, they know what you're in there for already, because 9 times out of the 10, the guards have already tipped them off if, you know, I'm a child molester or if I'm a snitch or anything like that. So it's in those moments, again, where these people can read you, and they can tell if you're scared. And if you're scared, they're going to turn you out. They're going to have you running weapons. They're going to have you doing everything, because they know you have that lay down, as what they call it, inside of you. You know, some people have the fight. It doesn't matter how many's in front of them. You're not going to punk me out. You know, you're just going to have to beat me down, kill me. And that, seeing deep in my heart, I always knew that that'll never happen, because men respect men. If you stand up for yourself, you know, and you show that you're not no punk, they'll leave you alone and they'll respect you and they'll make you one of theirs, They just don't want punks. They don't want snitches. They don't want, as they say, soft people around them. But that's the experience.
Are you familiar with a guy named Robert Roten who works in Arizona, and at least last I heard, and he does, or at least was doing, work with the courts around trauma-informed sentencing for people convicted in the criminal justice system?
I'm not familiar with him at all, no.
It may be, I mean, I couldn't put you in touch with him, but I would suggest, just in light of our conversation, his name popped into my mind. If you Google him, you could probably find him on LinkedIn, or quite possibly just Google. I haven't looked him up for some time. But Dr. Robert Roten, Roton, he may be very much worthwhile to talk to, maybe even have on your show. I don't know, but.
Cool. I would love to have you on the show again, man, because there's so many more things that I really want to get into. I had a brainstorm today that I'm going to look into. I'm sitting here thinking, I'm driving home, and I said, how can I reach kids that are just now starting to just cusp the idea of retaliation or rebellion? And I'm sitting here thinking, high schools, they have detention, right?
Right.
None of these teachers want to stay after school to sit through
That is a very good observation. Right? I would imagine that is true, yes.
What if I start a program right here? I have a high school right around the corner where I volunteer to do detention each day. And with these kids that come in, they have to sit here and listen to my lectures for an hour coming into detention.
Well, it's a striking idea and certainly worth exploring further. I mean, it would help you to have an influence on them. It would help them to maybe make some better decisions. I think sometimes what happens, especially in a place like a school, although I've never worked in a school, but there's so much that goes on. I mean, there's the academic part, there's COVID and quarantine related stuff, there's behavioral issues, there's parental issues, there's administrative issues, that when it comes to stuff like this, which often starts to show itself, if someone has trauma or whatever in challenging behavior in a school system, that I imagine the administrators often don't know how to respond effectively, what resources are available, if there even are any resources available. So for what it's worth, sounds like a good idea to me, and definitely worth investigating further.
We need more. Yeah. We need more mentorship. Mental mentorship in our schools. We need a SWAT team for the medical. I was talking with somebody the other day, but we need some sort of SWAT team for EMS, that when we have some sort of psychosis incident going on in the neighborhood, the police aren't the first to respond to that. We have some sort of tactical squad, some tactical EMS squad that knows how to deal specifically with all kinds of different psychoses and how to de-escalate those in those moments, versus cops showing up with guns and this guy's charging at them with a knife. What happened in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I think it was Philadelphia. In Massachusetts, they have a jail diversion program, which, if I remember correctly, a licensed mental health counselor or social worker will ride along with police when they respond to various incidences like that. And because they have sort of a specialist right there, the specialist can, if it's safe, do an assessment and make a referral that the police can then put this person into the pipeline for, so that they don't have to incarcerate an individual who may be better served by getting treatment for something.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, shoot.
One final question. What can parents do, and how can parents spot their children when they're just starting to go astray? What can parents do to communicate and connect with a child that they just cannot connect with?
It's a fantastic question. I'm going to, all right, so there's a long answer and the short answer. The slightly longer answer is that kind of thing starts when your kid is born. The most important age range for connecting with a child is the first 3 years. And sometimes unintentionally. Parents will tend to be dismissive of those years because they'll think, well, the kid, we can't talk, so how much can we really connect and communicate? But so much of communication, as we know, even as adults, is nonverbal. It's body language, it's cues, it's the energy someone gives off. And kids read that. They can't articulate it, even young children, but they can read it very much, and they need it. They need it desperately. The first 3 years builds the relational collateral, especially for the rest of that child's relationship with their parents. Now, if the first 3 years didn't go stellar, are things beyond recovery? Absolutely not. But we may have to practice what's called like remedial parenting, so to speak. The emphasis, regardless of the age range, and bearing in mind I'm not a family therapist, but from what I've seen and what I've been trained with, the emphasis should always be on connection, not correction. There's a place for correction. Kids don't know everything, and there's a lot to learn. But when we put the emphasis on correct behavior and best results, the relationship often gets sacrificed because we're more likely to be snide or critical or sarcastic or sometimes just savage, and even if only verbally. But the saying goes, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I have had so many individuals I've worked with over the years tell me, you know what, Brian? The bruises heal, but the words, they linger, and they don't always go away. So I guess I would say if your kid's starting to have a rough time, first of all, take them seriously. Never, ever, ever be contemptuous or dismissive of what your kid's going through. Even if it's something small in your perspective, it's their world and it's where they're at. So being able to demonstrate accurate empathy and compassion to your child is huge. Secondly, always make regular time to connect with your child. It doesn't mean you have to helicopter parent them. Quality time is important, not just quantity, because we have work, we have responsibilities, but make intentional efforts to connect with your child. Thirdly, you are not your child's friend, by which I mean their peer. As your child grows, the relationship will become more and more like a friendship and like a peer relationship. That's healthy. And certainly we should be friendly towards our children. But they need a parent, which means they need a mentor, someone who is mentor and guide and corrector. But more than that, someone who unconditionally has their back. It doesn't mean they approve of everything that they do. My mom put it to me really, really well once when I was misbehaving. I was sent to my room or whatever. I left a little note on her desk that says, "You don't love me anymore." And it's one of those cute. I was like 5. And she came to me later and she said, "I will always love you. I didn't like what you did, and I won't always like what you do, but I will always love you." And that has always stuck with me. That, in a nutshell, I think is what is most important. Now, things are going to get in the way of that, and that's why it requires intentionality, and it requires being willing, I think, as parents, to let some things go, let some opportunities pass, to whether it's, we might have a possibility for a better job with a better income, but if that income comes at the cost of quality time with children that they desperately need, well, I don't want to judge anyone's financial situation. Some things are just as important as money.
Well, the way that I look at that, Brian, okay, you may be cutting time with your child to make more money now, but what's going to end up happening is that money that you're making now is going to go right back into your child with court costs, just things of everything of that nature that comes with the neglect that the child grew up with. And that's, you have to look at it that way. It's you attack the problem now and make sure that it doesn't become a problem, because the opportunity for success is always going to be there. And we have to know that. We have to not be so quick to sacrifice important things for money, like you said, because if you have opportunity to make money now, you'll have opportunity to make money tomorrow. It's always going to be there, but the child is not. we only have one stretch of this. And like you say, every day that passes is a day that's gone, you know? So Brian, man, this was such a great conversation.
Thanks for having me.
So much,
I really appreciate that this was back and forth. I apologize. I guess I thought it was going to be more one-sided, but I like dialogue. I appreciate dialogue much better. So thanks for not only answering my questions, but being so forthright and honest. I have a ton of respect, not only for your answers, but for your forthrightness, for your courage, and the fact that you're doing this. I mean, these kinds of conversations that people can listen to and reflect upon, these are fantastic. I mean, I think this is how we start to affect meaningful and lasting change in things. So I wish you the best of luck with this stuff. Keep doing it, man. Keep doing it.
Man, I appreciate it. That's beautiful. And we need it. You know, like I say, I'm sitting around and I'm seeing discussions happen. You know, I listen, my wife more than I. She's more of a studious person than I, you know, so she can sit here and listen to these 2 and 3 hour lectures from Jordan Peterson and, the Joe Rogan and these guys. So I catch them in clips, but the thing of it is that these discussions need to happen more, like you say, but I'm not hearing the right discussions when it comes to prisoners and the drug problem and the mental problem that's going on in America and what's spawning that.
Yeah.
You know, real quick, the philosophy that I've applied to my life and what helped me deal with my trauma and is what helping me deal, because it's every day for me, I'm dealing with this, is doing legal work inside. I realized that when an error in the court occurs, everything that's behind that error is also an error. You have to go back to the original error and correct that error to right the course. You know, and when I started applying that to every aspect of my life, you know, it changed everything, because now I'm going back to the original error and course correcting from there. And everything just starts falling into place. So that's what we got to do, man. You know, I would love to have you back on again, partner. This has been great. I love the conversation. If you want to have a conversation with me, like, you know, I got questions for you. Just reach out to me and say, you know what, I got questions, and I'll bring you on and let you ask away, because I'm here to learn. I'm trying to help you learn. You know, I'm a criminal-minded person, you know, so I have a lot of experience I can share, and that's what I'm here for, you know. So if you want to pick my brain, I'm here for you.
I appreciate that very much, and thanks again for having me on this show. It's been a great time, great conversation.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.
You too.
Stay
Take care and God bless.
family,
Okay.
please.
All right. Bye-bye.